and the Baptist churches were discussing about the fact that slaveholding was evil. One of the greatest advocates for religious freedom, and I know people are going to sit there and they're going to say, oh my gosh, oh my gosh, oh my gosh, well, what about the Founding Fathers? They owned slaves. Well, here's what's really interesting. And unfortunately, my books are all packed up because of the fact that there's remodeling being done in my apartment. But one of the greatest advocates for religious freedom, and Patrick Henry, struggled mightily with the fact that slavery existed. And not only that, but when America was still British colonies, Virginia attempted to outlaw slavery. The delegation that was there, I'm not 100% sure on the date. I want to say it was in the 1720s, 1730s. It could have been earlier to that, but I'm pretty sure it was the 1720s, 1730s, maybe the 1740s. They were overruled by the British appointed governor. So what does that say? Well, it says that there were Christians out there, Christian leaders out there, whether it was Quakers, whether it was Baptists, whether it was Methodists, who were preaching against slavery. Preaching against slavery. Let's move to Jim Crow. In the discussions, there's actually a really good article by Lily Rothman at Time Magazine, which is really worth reading. She said that Obama was half right with Christianity and Jim Crow. Here's why. It's important to know this stuff so you can then explain it. And try to explain it simply, which is the toughest part. But here was the discussion that was going on. Is that you had the Federal Council of Churches denounce segregation. Right around 1948 was when they denounced it. 1957, the General Assembly of the Presbyterian Church said it is unthinkable that a Christian should join himself to clan or council whose purpose is to gain its point by intimidation, reprisal, violence, or that he should lift no voice of protest against those who appeal to prejudice and spare fear. You even had the Southern Christian Leadership Conference. Again, Southern Christian Leadership Conference that protested against discrimination. And by the way, what was Martin Luther King Jr.? Anyone here know what his... Anybody know what his occupation was? Anybody want to weigh in on this? Oh yeah, he was a preacher. He was a minister. Now, it is important to point out, and this is true, that there were people, Southern Baptists, other religions, that did use the Bible to say, hey, slavery's okay. There were. Dr. W.A. Criswell from First Baptist Church here in Dallas, a a man who I actually have great respect for because I knew him later on in life. But it was around 56, something like that, made a comment about Cigars in a speech at the Southern Baptist Theological Convention. And then he also ended up speaking it in South Carolina at the request by Strom Thurmond. Yeah, that's Strom Thurmond. But it's important to notice something else. And this was done at Florida State University. Somebody at Florida State University, Curtis W. Freeman, did a article on this. I just posted it in the chat room because it's a really interesting article. Actually, all you have to do is just look up W.A. Criswell Cigars, and it's the first thing that pops up. But in 1968, Criswell preached that he had been very, very blind to what happened. Very blind in his statements. And that he was wrong. And that he was wrong on segregation. And that he was sorry about that. And that he was also in favor of a racially open church and racially open church membership. It's a really interesting article to look at. It's a really interesting article to look at because context matters. Context matters. There's also something else, by the way, that was really interesting about this argument regarding Criswell. Is that locally here in Dallas, the clergy wasn't very happy about that. Not only that, Billy Graham, who was a member of First Baptist Church Dallas, yes, he was a member of FBC Dallas, said, "My pastor and I have never seen eye to eye on the race question." So, what do you see? You see that when Christians make comments that are considered to go against what the Bible says, and yes, the Bible mentions slavery, okay? But what do you see? You see other Christians willing to speak out. And that's important. That's what's really important. That's the thing that people need to realize. Is Christians are willing to speak out about this stuff if they disagree. And that is what really needs to happen in Islam, where if you look at polls, it suggests that 25% are in favor of the goals of Al-Qaeda or ISIS. But probably 10, 15%, 15, 20% are the ones who do that, who actually go out and do this stuff. The remaining 75%, 80%, they got to be willing to speak up. That is the issue the problem with what President Obama made. That's the problem. Boston Randy says in the chat room, yes, context matters. Yet Obama declined to mention that Jim Crow laws were created by Democrats during Reconstruction. Well, nobody wants to talk about that. Nobody really does want to talk about that. The Democrats like to just completely whitewash some of the stuff that they were involved in. And they get help too. But that's the issue. That is the issue that people forget. And that context has to be key. So with the president to make a very, very broad statement, it completely misses stuff that was done by Charles Grandison Finney during the Second Great Awakening, who was a very, very big abolitionist at Lena Dunham's favorite college, Oberlin. It ignores what the Quakers talked about. It ignores John Wesley. It ignores Amazing Grace. It ignores Wilberforce. It ignores John Newton, Hannah More, Benjamin Lundy. All that stuff. It ignores. It ignores the fact that Martin Luther King Jr. was a pastor. It ignores things that were done by the General Assembly of the Presbyterian Church and the Federal Council of Churches. And that's the problem. That's the problem here. And that's what needs to be remembered with this. Now, I've got a couple of minutes before the top of the hour, so I'm going to ask the chat this. We want to do overtime? Seriously, we want to do overtime? Anybody here interested in overtime? Yes, no, maybe? I'm kind of curious what the chat has to think. Michelle Malkin also went to Oberlin. Yes, I did charge Obama with being politically selective of history. Shock of all shocks. You know, let's do overtime, because I'm not done talking yet. And there's a lot going on. So we'll take a quick break. Be right back for overtime. This is Saturday Night Cigar Lounge here on Vigilant Liberty Radio. Back after this.
We want to welcome Michael Moore to Occupy Wall Street. I'm so impressed by what I'm seeing here.
How much of people's income do you, Michael Moore, want the government to confiscate?
Probably twice what we're paying right now.
It's not envy, it's war.
Where's the rage? Where's the uprising?
Storm the doors of the New York Stock Exchange.
It is a class war.
If
the wealthy paid their fair share.
For a documentary filmmaker, I do really well. I'm very blessed.
And the rich thought poverty was bad.
I do well.
They get rid of it.
What pure? There's nothing pure about capitalism.
And they know what's coming on Wall Street.
We're seeing the